The July sun of 1974 beat mercilessly against the aluminum fuselage of a C-130 transport plane. Inside, the unique, untamable energy of youth mingled with the smells of sweat, machine oil, and ozone. 20-year-old Commando Private Ahmet Kara was in the middle of telling a joke to Ali, who sat across from him, smiling under his mustache. The bursts of laughter were like a muffled chorus against the lead vocals of the engines. This was their world, a cocoon woven from camaraderie, fortified with anthems and jokes, completely insulated from the reality that was moments away. Ahmet didn't know fear, or rather, the fear he thought he knew was the sweet, controllable thrill of jumping from high walls during training or lying in ambush on a night march. True fear had not yet visited his soul, had not yet whispered his name. What flowed through his veins was not blood, but pure adrenaline and the desire to write history. They were the heroes who would bring peace to Cyprus. They were the living characters of legends. When the plane's red warning light flashed and Captain Toprak's stern voice boomed, "Get ready!" Ahmet's heart didn't skip with fear, but with the impatience of a racehorse at the starting line. When the ramp lowered, the rush of pressurized air and sunlight struck their faces like a slap. Below, Cyprus lay like an emerald scattered upon blue velvet. The view was as flawless as a painter's canvas, and just as deceptive. Ahmet watched the soldier before him leap into the void, and when his turn came, he didn't hesitate for a second. The moment the static line jerked him from the plane was the freest moment of his life. The roar of the engines vanished, replaced by a dreamlike silence and the whisper of the wind against the silk canopy. Hundreds of parachutes filled the sky like dandelion seeds. Seeds of peace. His meeting with the earth was harder than he expected. After landing with knees bent as he had been drilled, he found himself on soil that smelled of thyme and dry grass. For a moment, he looked up at the sky. His comrades, still descending, were the silent witnesses of this invasion. He hastily gathered his parachute, slung his G3 rifle over his shoulder, and ran towards the rendezvous point. When he regrouped with his squad, every face wore the same expression, the boyish pride of accomplishment. Captain Toprak surveyed each of them before unfolding his map. Everything was going exactly according to the plan they had rehearsed countless times in Ankara. Until the sound. At first, they couldn't place it. A solid, metallic sound from the distance, like a woodpecker pecking at a dry tree. Tack, 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 tack. This sound wasn't like the harmless crackle of blanks from training. This sound had weight, a presence. Seconds later, a whizzing noise that followed the sound and passed right by his ear froze Ahmet's blood. It was like the buzz of a bee, but this bee had a stinger made of steel. The agonized cry of one of the squad members, Sergeant Kamal, shattered the pastoral silence of the Commando Mountains like glass. In that instant, the excited, immortal 20-year-old boy inside Ahmet was shot and killed. In his place came a man filled with an icy feeling he had never known, a feeling that seeped into his very bones. This was fear itself. It had whispered his name and kicked down the door to his soul. The anthems were now silent, the heroic tales finished. The ugly, brutal, and deafening reality of war had begun. Their objective was a machine gun nest, positioned on a strategic slope that was pinning down the advance.
Captain Toprak had nicknamed it the Beast on the Hill. Every time that beast coughed, it spat a piece of hell, splintering the trunks of olive trees and chewing up the earth. The only way forward was to silence that beast. The captain's command, "Advance under covering fire!" was like a starting pistol. The soldiers burst from behind the rocks and trees they used as cover, as if pushed by an unseen force. All except Ahmet. His legs refused to obey the commands from his brain. It was as if he had taken root in the soil, transformed into one of the olive trees. His eyes were wider than they had ever been. He saw every detail, how the bullets made the dirt explode like tiny volcanoes, how his comrades staggered, how a running body could collapse into a lifeless sack in an instant. The word courage seemed to have been erased from his mind's dictionary. All that remained was the most primitive, most animalistic instinct. Survive, hide, don't move. As he writhed in the grip of this paralyzing fear, an image surfaced from the depths of his mind. His mother. That last dinner together, the night before he left for the army, sitting in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. His mother hadn't spoken much, only looked deep into his eyes. In her gaze, there was pride, love, and a profound sorrow that Ahmet couldn't name at the time. The crumpled letter she had pressed into his palm as he left. It was now in the left breast pocket of his uniform, right over his heart. His trembling fingers went to his pocket as if touching a sacred amulet. Just feeling the presence of the paper under the fabric allowed him to take a breath. He knew the letter by heart. After the usual motherly advice and prayers, there was that final sentence. "Take care of yourself, be brave, but first remain human, my son." Be brave. Those two words now felt like an insult. How? How could one be brave when fear had poisoned the blood in his veins and taken his reason captive? What did it mean to remain human? Wasn't being a coward to stay alive a part of remaining human? His mind was buckling under the weight of these questions. Just then, a sound from behind a nearby bush cut through his internal struggle like a knife. It wasn't the whiz of a bullet or the cry of a command. It was the voice of his friend, Ali. A desperate, exhausted whisper. Ahmet. Ahmet, afraid to turn his head, only looked with the corner of his eye. Ali was huddled at the base of a rock. His face was as pale as chalk, but his eyes held none of the accusation, none of the coward expression Ahmet expected. In Ali's eyes, there was only pure, unadulterated helplessness and an acceptance of their shared fate. Ahmet, that beast, we have to silence it, or no one gets through. We're all going to die here. Ali's simple sentence, a mere statement of their military situation, struck Ahmet's mind like a bolt of lightning. Until that moment, his fear had been an entirely selfish emotion. I will die. I will be hurt. I will never see my mother again. But the look in Ali's eyes changed the equation. This was no longer about me. It was about us. His cowardice would not just be his own end, but the death warrant for Ali, for Captain Toprak, and for the others whose names he barely knew.
Suddenly, the beast on the hill intensified its coughing fit. One of the bullets ricocheted off a rock in front of Captain Toprak and struck him in the shoulder. The man who was the father, the anchor, the unshakable mountain of the squad, collapsed to the ground with a pained groan.
That image demolished the final line of defense inside Ahmet. The bullet that hit the captain had not just torn his flesh and bone, it had shattered Ahmet's last shred of courage. The situation was now hopeless. It was all over. But in that moment of absolute darkness, his mother's voice echoed in his mind again. "First, remain human, my son. Remain human." Perhaps remaining human meant taking a step for someone else, even as you were dying of fear. Perhaps courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the first step taken in spite of it. Ahmet looked at Ali, then at his wounded commander, and then at the hill that was spitting bullets. He had made his decision. It wasn't a heroic flash of inspiration like in the movies. It was a cold, calculated, almost mathematical decision. His fear hadn't vanished. It was still there, a knot of ice in his stomach. His hands still trembled, but it was no longer in control. Control now belonged to the desire to get his comrades off that hill alive. He took a deep breath. He accepted the fact that the air filling his lungs might be his last. This acceptance, strangely, set him free. He checked the 2 hand grenades on his belt. He felt for their pins. He released the safety on his G3. His mother was no longer in his thoughts, nor was the life he would leave behind. There was only one thing in his mind, the 20-meter deadly distance from the olive tree to the blind spot of the machine gun nest. And he began to run. The moment he burst from the shadow of the olive tree, the beast on the hill noticed him. The barrel turned towards him with all its fury. The world narrowed into a tunnel for Ahmet. He couldn't see his left or his right. He could only see the dark nest ahead and feel the death raining down on him. Bullets chewed the dirt at his feet and burned the air as they passed. Ahmet wasn't running in zigzags. He was dancing with death. His steps were prayers. His breaths were pleas. Time slowed, each heartbeat a drumbeat in his ears. 15 seconds, maybe 16, but to Ahmet, it felt like a lifetime. When he threw himself into the blind spot at the base of the nest, his lungs felt like they would explode. For a brief moment, he leaned his back against the cool stone wall of the emplacement. He was safe, but the mission wasn't over. Before fear could regain control, he moved with instinctive speed. He took a grenade in his hand. The words of his commander from training came to him. Pull the pin, wait 4 seconds, and throw. Don't give them a chance to react. He hooked his finger through the pin's ring. The coldness of the metal met the sweat in his palm. He pulled. He heard the hiss. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th second, he swung his arm with all his might and sent the grenade through the nest's embrasure. He immediately followed it with the second one. He dropped to the ground and covered his head with his hands. First came a muffled explosion. The second was more violent. The blast wave, carrying dirt and stone fragments, washed over Ahmet. And then, silence. It was the most terrifying, most abnormal, most deafening silence on the battlefield. The beast on the hill was quiet. The machine that had been chattering incessantly for minutes, spinning death, was now condemned to eternal silence. Ahmet slowly lifted his head. A thin wisp of black smoke curled from the nest. There was no other movement. A few seconds later, cheers erupted from the rest of the squad. Ali was the first to reach him. He touched Ahmet's shoulder. "You did it, Ahmet! You did it!" Ahmet couldn't answer. He slowly slid down the wall he was leaning against and sat on the ground. All his strength was gone. The tremors that had shaken his body were now replaced by uncontrollable sobbing. It was not a cry of victory, nor was it a cry of relief or grief. It was the release of his soul, unburdening itself from a weight too great to bear. On that day, Ahmet Kara had done more than capture a hill. He had faced the greatest beast in the darkest valley of his own soul and had conquered it. He understood that day that true heroism wasn't in medals or headlines. True heroism was hidden in that first step taken towards death, taken while trembling with fear, simply so that others might live. Years later, in his village at the foot of the Cyprus Mountains, as his grandchildren played in his garden, Grandpa Ahmet would often place his hand over his left breast. There was no pocket there anymore, no uniform that had long since rotted away, but he could still feel at his fingertips the crumpled letter from his mother and the weight of that terrible yet honorable day he carried over his heart. And when his grandchildren asked him about the war, he never told them heroic tales. He only told them about the struggle of a scared young boy to remain human. Because he knew that the greatest victories are not won on the battlefield, but in the human heart.